The stainless steel counters of the Michelin-starred kitchen were immaculate, gleaming under the dim security lights like a morgue. Aurelio only needed to send one recipe adjustment for the upcoming culinary competition, but his phone was dead, so he flipped open his wife's MacBook. He expected to see marketing spreadsheets. Instead, an open iMessage window stared back at him, detailing a hotel room number, a time, and a raw, breathless confession of love addressed to a lounge singer named Primrose. The perfect marriage that had built his culinary empire was nothing but a well-plated lie. If stories of silent betrayals, cold-blooded revenge, and the devastating price of ambition speak to you, pour a glass of wine, dim the lights, and stay with me. The kitchen of Laura at 2 in the morning was Aurelio's sanctuary. Stripped of the chaotic symphony of clinking pans, shouting sous chefs, and the relentless hum of the exhaust hoods, the stainless steel prep stations looked like surgical tables bathed in the pale, blue security light. It smelled faintly of truffles, reduction sauce, and the sharp bite of industrial citrus cleaner. Aurelio rubbed his exhausted eyes, the heavy linen of his chef's coat feeling like armor he had worn for far too long. The semifinals for the Apex Culinary Masters were only 2 days away. The network had practically moved into his dining room, turning his life's work into a glorified reality show. He needed to email a last-minute adjustment for his tasting menu, a swap from venison to squab, but his phone screen was dead, a black, lifeless rectangle mocking his urgency. "Just use mine, darling," Blythe had murmured sleepily 3 hours ago before heading up to their penthouse, leaving her sleek, silver MacBook resting on the corner of his desk in the back office. Aurelio walked into the cramped office and tapped the trackpad. The screen flared to life, illuminating his tired, deeply lined face. He didn't mean to pry. He truly didn't. He clicked the browser icon, intending to open his email, but his finger brushed against the edge of the trackpad, bringing up a minimized window. It was the Messages app. Aurelio froze. His breath hitched in his throat, a sudden, cold stone dropping into the pit of his stomach. There, glowing against the harsh white background of the screen, was a conversation thread with someone named Primrose. The name alone was a stark contrast to Blythe's corporate, meticulously curated contact list. But it wasn't the name that made the blood roar in Aurelio's ears. It was the photo attached to the latest message. It was Blythe, his beautiful, calculating, brilliant wife. She was lying on a bed with sheets of deep crimson, sheets that certainly didn't belong to their minimalist, cream-colored bedroom. Her eyes were half closed, her lips parted in a breathless smile that Aurelio hadn't seen directed at him in years. The lighting was moody, intimate, bathed in the neon glow of a city street lamp outside a window. Below the photo was a text, sent by Blythe at 1:15 a.m., just 45 minutes ago while Aurelio was meticulously scrubbing down the line. "Blythe, he's still downstairs, working on the squab. I can still taste you on my skin, my little bird. Tomorrow at the Velvet Room. 3 p.m. Don't be late. Primrose, I'll be waiting. Bring that cruel mouth of yours." Aurelio's hands began to tremble, a violent tremor that started in his fingertips and seized his broad shoulders. He gripped the edge of the desk so hard his knuckles turned white. He scrolled up. The messages spanned months. A digital graveyard of his marriage. Videos, voice notes, whispered promises of a life far away from the Michelin stars, the PR campaigns, and the suffocating pressure of Laura. He clicked on a short audio file. The soft, sultry, and undeniably heartbreaking voice of a woman filled the silent office. "I sing for them every night, Blythe, but I only look at you. Leave him. You said the marriage was just a brand anyway. Just a brand." Aurelio felt as if a physical blade had been driven up under his ribs, slicing through his lungs. He gasped for air in the quiet room. For 7 years, they had been San Francisco's golden couple. She was the marketing genius who sold his culinary brilliance to the world. They were a unified front, an impenetrable fortress of success. And yet, here, in the cold light of a laptop screen, he was reduced to a business arrangement. A stepping stone. He didn't scream. He didn't smash the laptop against the brick wall, though every muscle in his body begged for destruction. Instead, a terrifying, absolute stillness washed over him. He carefully forwarded the entire thread to his secure, private server. Then, he closed the window, leaving the laptop exactly as he found it. When Aurelio walked back out into the dark kitchen, the smell of the truffles made him violently nauseous. The game had changed. The competition was no longer about food. The morning sun hitting the fog outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Laura did nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep within Aurelio's bones. By 8 a.m., the dining room was a chaotic tangle of thick black cables, towering lighting rigs, and frantic producers barking orders. The semifinals of Apex Culinary Masters demanded a behind-the-scenes look at the genius at work, and Blythe had ensured they got exactly what they paid for. She swept into the kitchen at precisely 8:15 a.m., a vision of effortless corporate elegance. Her tailored cream blazer draped perfectly over her shoulders, her dark hair pulled into a sleek, impenetrable chignon. To the crew, she was the brilliant strategist, the steady anchor to Aurelio's temperamental artist. To Aurelio, she was a stranger wearing his wife's face. "There's my star," she cooed, her voice pitched perfectly for the boom mic hovering just out of frame. She stepped behind him as he meticulously scored a slab of dry-aged duck breast. Her delicate hands rested lightly on his broad shoulders, sliding down his arms in a gesture of intimate familiarity. It took every ounce of Aurelio's formidable willpower not to flinch. Her touch, once his sanctuary, now felt like a swarm of insects crawling over his skin. He was up until 3 adjusting the squab, Blythe announced to the lead producer, flashing a smile that was both tired and fiercely proud. He never stops. The pursuit of perfection is a heavy cross, isn't it, darling? Aurelio gripped the handle of his boning knife. The steel felt cool and grounding against his calloused palm. He forced himself to inhale the metallic scent of raw meat, grounding his spiraling thoughts. "I can still taste you on my skin, my little bird." The text message echoed in his mind, overlaying Blythe's polished corporate tone. "It is what it is," Aurelio replied, his voice a gravelly, low rumble. He didn't look up from the cutting board. He couldn't. If he looked into her eyes, he knew the mask would slip. He would see the deep crimson sheets. He would hear Primrose's sultry, sorrowful voice. "Look at this focus," the producer murmured, gesturing for the cameraman to push in tight on Aurelio's hands. "Give us a moment of connection, Blythe. Lean in." Blythe obliged. She leaned her cheek against his back, her arms wrapping around his waist. Aurelio stopped breathing. The scent of her expensive, custom-blended perfume filled his nostrils, but underneath the sandalwood and bergamot, he searched frantically for something else. A trace of smoke, a hint of cheap lounge whiskey, the scent of another woman. "We built this together," Blythe whispered, for the benefit of the rolling cameras. "Every late night, every sacrifice." "You said the marriage was just a brand anyway." A violent wave of nausea roiled in Aurelio's stomach. He stepped away from the prep station, abruptly breaking her hold under the guise of grabbing a bundle of thyme from the walk-in refrigerator. The sudden movement caught the crew off guard, but Blythe smoothly covered it with a knowing, affectionate laugh. "The artist needs his space," she charmed them, flawlessly repairing the narrative tear. Inside the freezing, stainless steel sanctuary of the walk-in, Aurelio rested his forehead against the cold metal shelving. His lungs burned as he gasped the frigid air. The dilemma was agonizing. He could walk out there right now, hurl the duck breast at the camera lens, and scream the truth to the millions of viewers tuning in. He could burn Laura to the ground and watch Blythe burn with it. But if he did that, he lost everything. The Michelin stars, the empire, his identity. Aurelio slowly stood up straight, his reflection distorted in the shiny metal wall of the refrigerator. He smoothed the front of his pristine white chef's coat. He would not let her destroy his life's work. If this marriage was just a brand, he would use it to craft a masterpiece of destruction. He would serve his vengeance so perfectly, so meticulously plated, that she wouldn't realize she was consuming poison until it was far too late. The Velvet Room was a subterranean relic tucked beneath the steep, rain-slicked streets of Nob Hill. It was a world entirely antithetical to the blinding, sterile perfection of Laura. Here, the air was thick with the scent of stale bourbon, melting wax, and the heavy musk of damp wool coats. Aurelio slipped through the unmarked brass doors just past midnight, collar turned up, a heavy wool overcoat obscuring his chef's whites. He bypassed the hostess, slipping a folded $50 bill into her palm, and retreated to a cramped, semicircular booth in the darkest corner of the room. He did not have to wait long. A slow, mournful note from an upright bass vibrated through the floorboards, settling deep in Aurelio's chest. The muted amber spotlights shifted, cutting through the hazy air to illuminate the small, circular stage. And there she was. Primrose did not command the room with explosive energy. She surrendered to it. She wore a slip dress of midnight blue silk that clung to her frame, her dark hair falling in soft, unkempt waves across her bare shoulders. She looked exhausted, yet undeniably magnetic. There was a raw, bruising vulnerability in the way she wrapped both hands around the vintage microphone stand, as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the earth. When she began to sing, Aurelio felt the breath leave his lungs. It was the exact voice from the hidden audio file, smoky, low, and laced with a profound, aching melancholy. She sang a slow, jazz rendition of an old standard, her eyes closed, lost in a private agony that the audience mistook for performance. Sitting in the shadows, Aurelio gripped his glass of neat whiskey until his knuckles ached. He wanted to find her repulsive. He wanted to look at this lounge singer and see a cheap, shallow distraction. It would have made the betrayal easier to swallow. Instead, a cold, terrifying realization washed over him. Primrose possessed the one thing Blythe had ruthlessly excised from their own lives. She was entirely, unapologetically uncalculated. For years, Blythe had curated every aspect of their existence. Every smile, every public kiss, every plated dish was a calculated metric designed for maximum engagement. They lived in a fortress of PR strategy. But here, in this dim, suffocating room, Primrose offered nothing but raw, bleeding emotion. Aurelio understood, with a sickening clarity, exactly what his wife sought in those crimson sheets. She sought an escape from the brand she herself had created. As Primrose hit a sustained, mournful note, her eyes fluttered open, scanning the dark sea of tables. For a fleeting, terrifying second, her gaze swept past Aurelio's hidden booth. He froze, the glass halfway to his mouth. The dilemma tore at his insides. He could stand up right now. He could walk into the amber light, introduce himself as the man whose bed she was destroying, and watch the terror replace the melancholy in her eyes. He could end the charade tonight. But Aurelio was a chef of the highest order. He knew the value of patience. A reduction sauce could not be rushed. It had to simmer until all the weak flavors evaporated, leaving only a dark, potent essence. He forced himself to sit back against the worn leather upholstery. He would not confront her. Not yet. He needed to study the poison before he could craft the perfect, fatal antidote. He left $100 bill on the table, the untouched whiskey beside it, and walked out into the freezing San Francisco rain, the haunting melody of his wife's lover following him into the dark. 7 years ago, before the television cameras, before the bespoke suits, and long before the PR campaigns, there was only the suffocating heat of a tiny pop-up kitchen in the Mission District. Blythe used to sit on an overturned milk crate near the dish pit, her expensive heels kicked off, tallying their meager receipts while Aurelio perfected his sauces. "We aren't just feeding them, Elio," she had told him one late night, her eyes burning with a fierce, intoxicating ambition as she tasted a spoonful of his delicate, citrus-infused beurre blanc. "We are selling a love story. We are selling a flawless romance on a plate. That is our brand." Now, standing under the blinding, unforgiving studio lights of the Apex Culinary Masters semifinals, that flawless romance tasted like ash in his mouth. The theme for this round was evolution. For weeks, Blythe had meticulously orchestrated his menu for this exact moment. A progression of vibrant, hopeful courses that mirrored their meteoric rise. He was supposed to prepare his signature scallop crudo with bright yuzu and sweet melon. It was safe. It was beautiful. It was a lie. Aurelio looked at the pristine, translucent scallops on his prep board, then glanced at the monitor where Blythe was standing off camera, chatting with the showrunner. She looked perfectly composed, entirely unaware that he held the executioner's axe. He pushed the yuzu aside. Instead, Aurelio reached beneath his station for ingredients he had quietly requested that morning. Black garlic, bitter radicchio, bone marrow, and a jar of culinary ash made from burnt hay and onion skins. The cameras zoomed in as Aurelio ignited the blowtorch. He didn't gently sear the radicchio. He scorched it until the edges curled into blackened, brittle lace. He whipped the bone marrow into a heavy, rich emulsion, darkening it with the fermented garlic until it resembled wet earth. He was no longer cooking to please. He was cooking to purge. He poured every ounce of his silent agony, every memory of those crimson sheets, and the haunting echo of Primrose's voice into the pan. The sizzle of searing meat and the sharp, acrid smell of burnt wood filled the studio. From the corner of his eye, Aurelio saw Blythe's corporate smile falter. Her posture stiffened. She leaned in toward the producer, her brow furrowing slightly. She recognized that he was deviating from her carefully curated script, and for the first time in years, she had no control over the narrative. When the time was called, Aurelio plated the dish. It was a stark, brutal contrast to his usual vibrant style. The pale scallop was drowning in a dark, bruised landscape of charred leaves and black sauce, dusted with a fine layer of gray ash. It looked like the aftermath of a fire. He presented the plate to the panel of 3 renowned judges. Silence fell over the studio as they tasted the dark creation. Blythe held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped a clipboard. If they sent him home now, the brand would take a massive hit. The lead judge, a notoriously harsh French critic, closed his eyes, chewing slowly. The silence stretched until it became a physical weight in the room. Finally, the judge set down his fork. He looked up at Aurelio, his expression unreadable. "Chef," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet studio. "Your work has always been characterized by a certain joyful buoyancy. This dish is unsettling. It is heavy, aggressive, and fiercely bitter." Blythe closed her eyes, preparing for the failure. Yet, the judge continued, leaning forward, "It is profoundly brilliant. The bitterness challenges the palate, cutting through the richness in a way that feels incredibly vulnerable. It doesn't taste like a fairy tale anymore, chef. It tastes like heartbreak and survival. It is a mature, dark narrative, and it is a masterpiece." Aurelio did not smile. He simply nodded his head in acknowledgement. Across the room, Blythe let out a breathless laugh of relief, clapping for the cameras, believing she had just witnessed a stroke of unscripted genius. She had no idea she was applauding her own funeral. The penthouse suspended above Nob Hill was a fortress of glass, steel, and curated silence. While Blythe slept soundly in the master bedroom, wrapped in high thread count Egyptian cotton, Aurelio sat in the cavernous study. The room was dark, save for the harsh, clinical glare of his secured desktop monitor. The initial, blinding shock of the previous nights had burned away. In its place, a crystallized, terrifying clarity had settled over him. He was no longer a grieving husband. He was a forensic auditor examining the wreckage of his own life. He had mirrored the files he forwarded from her laptop, organizing them by date and location. As he scrolled backward through the timeline, the true architecture of Blythe's deception revealed itself. This was not a sudden lapse in judgment or a momentary weakness born of marital fatigue. It was a masterclass in compartmentalization. The digital breadcrumbs led him back exactly 14 months. Aurelio clicked on a folder labeled Client Analytics 2024. Inside, disguised as PDF reports, were hundreds of screenshots, audio notes, and hotel booking confirmations. He opened a receipt from a boutique hotel in Seattle. He remembered that weekend perfectly. They had flown up for a prestigious culinary summit. Blythe had complained of a severe migraine, excusing herself from the keynote dinner to rest in their suite. His eyes scanned a text exchange timestamp during that very dinner. Blythe, he just left for the stage. The coast is clear. Room 412. Primrose, I'm in the elevator. I brought the vintage you like. Aurelio leaned back in the heavy leather chair, the air suddenly too thin to breathe. He remembered rushing back to the suite after his speech, carrying a tray of chamomile tea, only to find Blythe freshly showered, wearing a silk robe, claiming the hot water had finally eased her tension. The memory twisted violently in his gut. The hot water hadn't cured her migraine. She had been washing the scent of the lounge singer off her skin before her husband returned. He kept digging, unable to stop the masochistic compulsion to know everything. He found photographs taken at charity galas they had attended together. While Aurelio was smiling for the paparazzi, plating hors d'oeuvres for the elite of San Francisco, Blythe was sending Primrose pictures from the coat check, from empty hallways, her expressions feral and hungry. They had lived a parallel existence right under the flashing cameras of the media. The audacity of it paralyzed him. Every late-night PR crisis, every sudden weekend business trip to Los Angeles or New York, every time she pulled away from his touch claiming the stress of the restaurant was too much. It was all carefully orchestrated choreography to maintain her secret life. The silence of the penthouse pressed against his eardrums. He looked at the baby monitor screen sitting on the edge of the desk, a cruel relic from a conversation they had abandoned 3 years ago when the brand became more important than a family. Aurelio closed the folders and wiped the viewing history from the server. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, gazing out at the sleeping city shrouded in thick, rolling fog. He had spent his entire career mastering the elements of fire, heat, and time to create something beautiful. Blythe had spent the last year mastering the elements of deceit, illusion, and manipulation to destroy him. The playing field was finally illuminated. He knew the timeline. He knew the locations. Now, it was time to bring the two worlds together and watch the collision. The private dining room at Laura was a masterclass in aggressive minimalism, dark mahogany, raw silk walls, and a single, massive crystal chandelier that cast splintered light over the stark white tablecloth. Tonight, Aurelio was not just cooking for the Apex producers and the 3 judges. He was hosting a private tasting, an intimate showcase of his Evolution menu before the grand finale. Blythe stood at the head of the table, an immaculate hostess in a backless emerald gown. She poured vintage burgundy with practiced grace, laughing at the lead judge's acerbic jokes, the very picture of a devoted, successful partner. "The atmosphere tonight is exquisite, Aurelio," the lead judge remarked, admiring the dark, moody ambience that had replaced Laura's usual bright, ethereal aesthetic. "Very theatrical. But I feel we need a soundtrack to match this new, complex narrative of yours." Aurelio emerged from the kitchen doors, wiping his hands on a pristine towel. His eyes met Blythe's across the room, a gaze so flat and unreadable it caused her smile to falter for a fraction of a second. "I agree," Aurelio said, his voice a low, resonant rumble. "In fact, I took the liberty of arranging some live entertainment for us. A touch of local flavor to complement the bitterness of the first course." He gestured toward the far corner of the room, previously obscured by a heavy velvet curtain. A producer gave a signal, and the curtain drew back. Sitting on a stool, bathed in a single, pale spotlight, was Primrose. She wore the same midnight blue slip dress Aurelio had seen her in at the Velvet Room, but under the harsh, expensive lighting of Laura, she looked incredibly fragile. Her dark eyes, usually heavy with a smoky, protective melancholy, were wide with barely concealed terror as they locked onto Blythe. Aurelio watched the blood drain from his wife's face. It was a spectacular, almost violent reaction. For exactly 2 seconds, the polished veneer of the PR genius vanished entirely, leaving behind a woman paralyzed by pure, unadulterated panic. Blythe's grip on the heavy crystal wine decanter tightened until her knuckles turned translucent, a tremor running up her slender arm. "This is Primrose," Aurelio announced smoothly to the judges, stepping forward and placing a hand on the back of Blythe's chair. A remarkable talent I discovered performing at a little subterranean lounge on Nob Hill. I felt her voice captured the hidden depths of my new menu perfectly. Don't you agree, darling? He squeezed the back of Blythe's chair, just tight enough to force her attention away from the singer and back to him. Yes, Blythe breathed, her voice tight and entirely stripped of its usual melodic warmth. It's a brilliant choice, Elio. So unexpected. I thought so, Aurelio replied softly, turning his attention to the stage. Whenever you're ready, miss. Primrose swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically between Aurelio's impassive face and Blythe's rigid posture. She closed her eyes, gripped the microphone stand, and began to sing. It was the same mournful jazz standard, but tonight, the lyrics hung in the air like a confession. The raw, bleeding emotion in her voice was no longer a performance. It was a desperate, agonizing plea directed straight at the woman pouring wine at the head of the table. As the first course arrived, a dark, charred octopus tentacle sitting in a pool of blood-red chili oil, Aurelio took his seat beside his wife. He did not eat. He simply watched the interplay of shadows across Blythe's throat as she forced herself to swallow the food, her eyes locked on her plate, unable to look at the woman singing her heart out just 10 feet away. The tension in the room was palpable, sharp as a chef's knife, yet completely invisible to everyone except the three of them. Under the table, Aurelio rested his hand lightly on his wife's knee. She flinched violently at the contact, the sudden, physical reminder of the man she was betraying while her lover sang their secrets to the room. Aurelio smiled, raising his glass of water to his lips. The game had truly begun. The morning after the dinner party, the penthouse felt less like a home and more like a high-stakes war room. The thick San Francisco fog pressed heavily against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a pallid, gray light over the sleek, minimalist furniture. Blythe paced the length of the marble kitchen island, her phone glued to her ear, frantically barking orders to her PR team. Her usual composed demeanor was fractured, her voice tight and uncharacteristically sharp. Aurelio stood at the espresso machine, his back to her, meticulously tamping the dark roast grounds. He watched her reflection in the polished chrome of the machine. The dark circles under her eyes, expertly concealed by concealer yesterday, were now starkly visible. The private performance by Primrose had clearly shattered her equilibrium. Cancel the interview with Gourmet today, Blythe snapped into the phone. Tell them Aurelio is focusing purely on the finale. We need to control the narrative. The dark menu, it's risky. The producers love it, but we need to spin it as a profound artistic awakening, not a breakdown. She ended the call, dropping the phone onto the counter with a loud clatter. She dragged a hand through her perfectly styled hair, looking exhausted and cornered. Aurelio turned around, holding 2 small ceramic cups of espresso. He placed one in front of her, his expression a mask of supportive, slightly bewildered concern. You look tired, darling, he said, his voice gentle, a perfect imitation of the man she thought she had married. The pressure is immense, I know, but the dinner party was a triumph. Blythe flinched at the mention of the dinner party, her hand freezing halfway to her cup. Yes, she managed, forcing a thin smile. It was intense. The singer, Elio, where did you find her? She was quite dramatic. Just a random spot on Nob Hill. Aurelio lied effortlessly, his gaze steady on hers. She had a certain raw quality. It fit the mood of the charred octopus perfectly. But, Blythe, I've been thinking about our strategy. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his broad chest. He was about to play his most dangerous card. The producers, the judges, they all see this dark, intense evolution in my food. Aurelio continued, his tone turning conspiratorial. They want the why. They want the story behind the shift. What if we give them one? What if we lean into the drama? Blythe's professional instincts immediately flared, temporarily overriding her personal panic. Her eyes narrowed slightly, calculating. What do you mean? What if we leak a rumor? Aurelio suggested softly, watching her face intently. A rumor that the pressure of the Michelin stars, the competition, that it's straining our marriage. That my dark menu is a reflection of a personal crisis. A near separation. Blythe stared at him, stunned. For a long moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the hiss of the espresso machine. "Are you insane?" she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "Our entire brand is built on the perfect romance. If we leak that we're struggling, the sponsors will panic. But the ratings will explode," Aurelio countered smoothly, echoing the exact words she had used to convince him to join the Apex competition months ago. "People love a flawless romance, but they are obsessed with a beautiful tragedy. We control the leak. We control the narrative. We tell them it was a dark period, but the finale is our triumph over it. The ultimate redemption." He stepped closer, invading her personal space, his imposing frame casting a shadow over her. "I need you to handle this, Blythe. I need you to set up the leak. Use your private channels, the ones the network doesn't track." He was handing her the rope. He knew she had a burner phone. He knew she had contacts in the gossip columns, the very channels she had likely used to cover her tracks with Primrose. By forcing her to use them now, under his directive, he was forcing her to document her own deceit. Blythe swallowed hard, her eyes darting away from his intense stare. The conflict raged within her. The PR genius saw the explosive potential of the strategy. The cheating wife saw the terrifying proximity to the truth. I'll think about it," she stammered, grabbing her espresso cup and retreating toward the study. "It's a huge risk, Elio. I trust you," Aurelio called softly after her retreating figure. "You always know how to spin a secret." He turned back to the window, a cold smile touching the corners of his mouth. The trap was set. Now, he just had to wait for her to walk right into it. The heavy oak door of Blythe's home office clicked shut, leaving Aurelio alone in the penthouse. She had claimed an emergency meeting with the Apex producers across town, rushing out with a nervous, manic energy that had been building since the dinner party. Aurelio didn't believe her for a second. He knew she was panicking, scrambling to contain the fallout of Primrose's sudden appearance and his dangerous new PR strategy. He moved quickly, bypassing her main computer and heading straight for the small, innocuous-looking external hard drive tucked behind a stack of industry magazines on the bottom shelf of her bookcase. He had noticed it days ago, a subtle anomaly in her otherwise paperless, hyper-organized workspace. He plugged it into his own encrypted laptop, his heart hammering a dull, heavy rhythm against his ribs. The drive was password-protected, but Aurelio had spent 7 years learning the exact cadence of his wife's mind. He didn't try their anniversary or her birthday. He typed in the date they received their first Michelin star. The drive unlocked with a soft, synthetic chime. Inside was a single folder titled Archive_2023. Aurelio opened it, expecting to find more hotel receipts or deleted photos with the lounge singer. Instead, he found a meticulously organized dossier of emails, strategic outlines, and engagement metrics dating back over a year and a half, long before he ever suspected a crack in their marriage. He clicked on an email chain between Blythe and a notorious, high-profile celebrity gossip blogger based in Los Angeles. The subject line read, "Project Laura Fracture." Aurelio leaned closer to the screen, his breath turning shallow and rapid. From Blythe to redacted blogger date, October 14th, 2023. Subject, Project Laura Fracture. The perfect couple narrative is plateauing. Engagement on the brand accounts is down 12% this quarter. The market is saturated with flawless romances. They want grit. They want a scandal they can consume and then forgive. We need to introduce a third party, a credible threat to the marriage. It will dominate the culinary news cycle right before the Apex casting begins. Aurelio felt the blood drain entirely from his face. The room spun, a sickening vertigo taking hold. He scrolled down, his hands trembling violently. Reply from blogger, bold move, Blythe. You want me to float a blind item? Who is the target? It needs to be someone contrasting to your image. Someone dark, messy, a starving artist type. Reply from Blythe, exactly. I have someone in mind. A lounge singer at a dive bar on Nob Hill. Nobody knows her. I'll initiate contact under the guise of scouting talent for private events. I'll provide you with leaked photos over the next few months, blurry, suggestive, but deniable. The speculation will drive our metrics through the roof. Elio doesn't need to know. He's too focused on the food. I'll handle the fallout. Aurelio violently shoved away from the desk, the heavy leather chair crashing into the bookcase behind him. He gasped for air, his hands clutching the edges of the desk to keep from collapsing. This was not a tragic, passionate affair born of loneliness. It was not a desperate escape from the pressure of the brand. It was the brand. Blythe had engineered her own infidelity as a marketing stunt. She had scouted Primrose, targeted her, and manipulated her into a relationship purely to generate a viral, scandalous narrative that would secure their spot on a reality television show and boost their restaurant's engagement metrics. She had calculated the exact price of her marriage and sold it to a gossip blog to buy a third Michelin star. But as Aurelio looked back at the screen, a new, agonizing realization dawned on him. He remembered the raw, bleeding emotion in Primrose's voice. He remembered the desperate, possessive texts he had read on the laptop. Blythe had started this as a cold, sociopathic PR stunt, but somewhere in those crimson sheets, the lie had become real. She had actually fallen in love with the weapon she forged to use against him. The ultimate betrayal was not that she slept with another woman. It was that she had orchestrated his destruction for profit, and then accidentally found her soul in the wreckage. Aurelio stood up, a terrifying, absolute calm washing over him. The Michelin star was cold, heavy, and tasted exactly like ashes. He closed the laptop. The final menu was set. The afternoon fog had thickened, rolling down the steep incline of California Street like a physical manifestation of Aurelio's suffocating reality. He had left the penthouse immediately after reading the Project Laura Fracture emails, driving in a state of chilling, detached calm toward the Velvet Room. The subterranean lounge was closed to the public at this hour. Aurelio slipped a crisp $100 bill to the bartender polishing glasses near the entrance, who silently pointed a rag toward the cramped, dimly lit back office. He didn't knock. He simply turned the brass knob and stepped inside. Primrose was sitting on a faded velvet sofa, a half-empty glass of amber liquid dangling dangerously from her fingertips. She looked up, her dark, heavy-lidded eyes widening in a sudden spike of genuine panic as Aurelio's imposing frame filled the doorway. "What do you want?" she rasped, her voice instantly losing its sultry stage quality, replaced by a defensive, brittle edge. She sat up straighter, pulling her oversized cardigan tighter around her shoulders, instinctively protecting herself from the man whose life she thought she was stealing. Aurelio slowly closed the door behind him, turning the lock with a soft, definitive click. The air in the small room was stale, smelling of old paper and anxiety. "I think we skipped the formalities at the dinner party, Primrose," Aurelio began, his voice a low, terrifyingly polite rumble. He didn't move toward her. He stood near the door, a monolithic presence. "You sang beautifully, but I suppose you've had plenty of practice performing for my wife." Primrose flinched violently, the glass in her hand trembling. She looked away, staring hard at the scuffed floorboards. "I don't know what you're talking about, chef." "Don't," Aurelio commanded softly, the single word carrying the weight of a physical blow. "Don't insult my intelligence. I know about the hotel in Seattle. I know about the crimson sheets. I've read the messages, heard the voice notes. I know you think you're saving her from a cold, loveless marriage." Tears sprang instantly to Primrose's eyes, spilling over her dark lashes. The defensive posture crumbled, revealing the raw, aching vulnerability Aurelio had witnessed during her performance. "I love her," Primrose whispered, her voice breaking. "And she loves me. It wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. The marriage is just a business arrangement to her, Aurelio. She told me. You both know it." Aurelio felt a cold, sharp pang of pity for the woman sitting before him. She was bleeding for a love story that had been storyboarded in a PR strategy meeting. "Did she?" Aurelio asked, finally taking a slow step forward. "Did she tell you how you met?" "She said she came in to scout talent for private events. Didn't she?" Primrose nodded hesitantly, a flicker of confusion crossing her tear-streaked face. Aurelio reached into the inner pocket of his wool coat and pulled out a single sheet of printed paper. It was the email exchange with the Los Angeles gossip blogger. He stepped forward and dropped it onto the small, cluttered coffee table between them. "Read it," he ordered, his voice devoid of any emotion. Primrose stared at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Slowly, with trembling hands, she picked it up. Aurelio watched her eyes scan the text. He watched the exact moment her reality shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a sallow, deathly gray. Her breath hitched, a jagged, wet sound in the quiet room. This is a fake," she stammered, dropping the paper back onto the table, shaking her head frantically. "You made this up to poison it. To punish me." "Look at the date, Primrose," Aurelio said softly, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "October 14th. A month before she ever walked into this bar. She didn't find you by accident. She hunted you. You were selected because you were dark, messy, and a starving artist. You were a prop for a marketing campaign designed to boost engagement for Laura right before the Apex casting." Primrose covered her mouth with both hands, a muffled, agonizing sob tearing from her throat. Her entire body shook as the horrifying truth settled in her bones. The intense, passionate affair that had consumed her life, the late-night confessions, the promises of running away. It was all born from a cold, calculated spreadsheet. "She used you to build my brand," Aurelio stated, straightening up, the pity entirely gone, replaced by the relentless drive of his vengeance. "And she used me to build hers. You and I are just ingredients in her recipe for a third Michelin star." Primrose looked up at him, her eyes completely vacant, shattered beyond repair. The sultry lounge singer was gone, replaced by a broken, manipulated pawn. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Because the finale is tomorrow," Aurelio replied, turning toward the locked door. "And I want you to know exactly who you are bleeding for when I serve the final course." He unlocked the door and stepped back out into the freezing fog, leaving the shattered woman alone in the dark. The studio for the Apex Culinary Masters finale was a cavernous warehouse transformed into a high-gloss arena of steel, fire, and blinding television lights. The air smelled sharply of hot electronics, adrenaline, and ozone. In 30 minutes, Aurelio would walk onto the main stage to cook the most important meal of his life, broadcast live to millions. But right now, the silence in the soundproof, aggressively white green room was absolute. Aurelio stood by the vanity mirror, adjusting the pristine cuffs of his chef's coat. His face was a mask of cold, terrifying composure. Blythe sat on the edge of the leather sofa behind him, her phone vibrating silently in her lap. She hadn't spoken since they left the penthouse. Her skin was unusually pale, the flawlessly applied makeup failing to hide the hollow, hunted look in her eyes. "She called me," Blythe finally whispered, her voice barely breaking the heavy silence. It was a jagged, frightened sound. Aurelio didn't turn around. He met her gaze in the mirror, his dark eyes entirely devoid of the warmth that had sustained their marriage for 7 years. "Primrose," Blythe clarified, her voice trembling slightly. Her manicured fingers gripped the edge of the sofa tight enough to turn her knuckles white. "She called me from a payphone. She sounded destroyed. She said you showed her the emails." Aurelio slowly turned to face her, leaning casually against the vanity counter. He folded his arms over his broad chest. The physical space between them felt like a chasm. "I thought it was only fair she knew her role in the production," Aurelio replied smoothly, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing a vendor dispute. "It's bad form to keep the talent in the dark, darling. Especially when she was the key demographic target for Project Laura Fracture." Blythe flinched visibly at the name of the file. The corporate armor she had worn for years cracked instantly, revealing the raw panic underneath. She stood up abruptly, pacing the small room, her heels clicking rapidly against the linoleum floor. "You hacked my drive," she hissed, her eyes darting toward the locked door, terrified that a hot mic might be recording them. "You breached my private files. You breached my life," Aurelio countered, his voice dropping an octave, losing its conversational lightness. The coldness was replaced by a sudden, intense fury that seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her. You sold my marriage to a gossip blog for a 12% bump in engagement metrics. You used another human being as a prop to secure a television contract. Blythe stopped pacing, cornered against the stark white wall. She looked up at him, a desperate, calculating light returning to her eyes. She was a strategist above all else. She recognized that the game had shifted from offense to mere survival. It was a strategy, Elio, she breathed, reaching out to touch his arm. He stepped back sharply, as if she were radioactive. She let her hand drop, swallowing hard. It started as a strategy, but it had changed. I didn't mean to fall in love with the prop. Aurelio finished for her, a bitter, humorless smile twisting his lips. That's the tragic irony, isn't it? The great Blythe, master manipulator, outsmarted by her own heart. You built a lie to feed the brand, and ended up starving for it. He stepped closer, invading her personal space until she was pressed flat against the wall. The heavy, metallic scent of his determination enveloped her. The cameras are waiting, Blythe, he said softly, staring down at her. The final menu is set. The judges are hungry for the evolution. You wanted a masterpiece born of a beautiful tragedy. You're going to get exactly what you engineered. What are you going to do? She whispered, her voice trembling violently. The panic was genuine now. She had lost entirely control of the narrative, and the chef she had underestimated was holding the knife. I am going to cook, Aurelio replied simply, turning away and walking toward the door. And you are going to stand out there, under the lights, and smile for the cameras. You are going to play the perfect, supportive wife while I serve the truth on a silver platter. He gripped the handle, pulling the door open. The roar of the studio audience and the chaotic shouts of the producers flooded into the quiet green room. If you run, you lose the restaurant, Aurelio said over his shoulder, not looking back. If you stay, you watch it burn. Choose quickly, darling. Service is starting. The main stage of the Apex Culinary Masters finale was a cathedral of blinding light and sweeping crane cameras. The countdown clock above the floor glowed an angry, fluorescent red, ticking down the final seconds of the 2-hour cook time. The studio audience was a wall of hushed, electric anticipation. Aurelio stood at his stainless steel station, his breathing slow and metronomic. He was plating his final course. It was a dessert, a complex trompe l'oeil that demanded the steady hands of a surgeon. From her designated mark beside the host, Blythe stood frozen. The camera's red tally light was on her, capturing the image of the devoted wife waiting for her husband's crowning moment. Her smile was a rictus of sheer terror. She could not run. She was entirely trapped within the golden cage she had built. Knives down, chef, the host announced, his voice booming through the studio monitors. Aurelio stepped back, wiping his hands on his towel. He picked up the sleek, black slate tray holding 3 identical, meticulously crafted spheres and walked toward the judge's table. The dessert was visually stunning. Each sphere was a flawless, glossy crimson, mimicking the exact shade of the hotel bedsheets that had haunted Aurelio's nightmares. They caught the studio lights, reflecting a perfect, unblemished surface. It was the visual embodiment of the Laura brand, polished, romantic, and flawlessly engineered. Chef Aurelio, the lead French judge murmured, leaning forward to admire the plating. This is a dramatic departure from the charred, bitter landscapes of your previous courses. It looks purely romantic. What do we call this? Aurelio looked past the judges, his dark eyes locking onto Blythe. He saw the microscopic tremble in her jaw. I call it Project Fracture, Aurelio said, his voice resonant and startlingly clear through the lavalier microphone pinned to his collar. Blythe swayed slightly on her feet, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her own palms to keep from collapsing. The exterior, Aurelio continued, turning his gaze back to the judges, is a spun sugar shell. It represents the perfect narrative, the flawless romance that looks beautiful on camera, designed entirely to maximize engagement metrics and satisfy the public's hunger for a fairy tale. The judges exchanged intrigued, slightly confused glances. The studio audience remained dead silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere that deviated wildly from the standard reality show script. "Please, taste it," Aurelio instructed quietly. The three judges picked up their silver spoons and tapped the crimson spheres. The sugar glass did not yield softly. It shattered with a sharp, violent crack that echoed through the room. As the pristine shell broke apart, it revealed the interior. There was no sweet cream, no bright fruit. Instead, a thick, bruised purple fluid bled out onto the black slate. A bitter reduction of charred wormwood, black sesame, and fermented plum. The judges tasted the dark, acrid filling. The lead critic closed his eyes, his brow furrowing as the intense, astringent bitterness hit his palate, cutting aggressively through the lingering sweetness of the shattered shell. The inside. Aurelio spoke to the silent room, his voice dropping into a register of cold, unyielding authority, is the reality behind the brand. It is the taste of a marriage sold to a gossip blog for a 12% bump in social media traffic. It is the flavor of a calculated affair, engineered with a lounge singer, simply to create a profitable scandal. It is dark, it is messy, and it is entirely real. A collective, breathless gasp rippled through the studio audience. The producers in the control booth were undoubtedly screaming into their headsets, paralyzed between cutting the feed and letting the greatest television moment of the decade unfold live. "You asked for an evolution," Aurelio concluded, looking directly into the primary camera lens, the digital eye that was currently broadcasting his destruction to millions. "This is it. The beautiful lie is shattered. Only the bitter truth remains." He turned his head slowly, looking at his wife one last time. Blythe's corporate mask had completely disintegrated. Tears of absolute ruin tracked through her designer makeup. She was no longer a PR genius. She was a woman watching her empire burn to ash, exactly as she had scripted it. The silence of Laura's kitchen at 2 in the morning was profound, heavy, and absolute. The frantic, chaotic energy of the Apex finale felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been 48 hours since Aurelio shattered the crimson sugar sphere on live television. The immediate aftermath had been a surreal blur of flashing cameras, screaming producers, and the frantic rustle of lawyers descending upon the studio. Blythe had not spoken a single word to him since the cameras cut. She had fled the stage, her perfectly constructed life collapsing around her as the internet exploded with the truth of her manufactured affair. The gossip blog she had courted turned on her with savage delight, tearing the Laura brand apart piece by piece, exposing the cold, calculated manipulation behind the romance. Aurelio stood by his pristine, stainless steel prep station, the cold metal biting through the thin fabric of his chef's coat. The only light came from the blue glow of the security lamps overhead. The familiar scent of truffles and reduction sauce still hung in the air, but it no longer offered comfort. It smelled only of ambition and betrayal. He looked at the small, framed certificate sitting on the corner of his desk. Winner, Apex Culinary Masters. Beside it, a heavy, cream-colored envelope bearing the crest of the Michelin Guide. The third star was practically guaranteed. His bold, aggressive evolution menu had been hailed by critics as a brutal, honest masterpiece. He had achieved the ultimate culinary peak, standing alone at the summit of San Francisco's fine dining world. Yet, as Aurelio traced the raised lettering of the certificate with his fingertip, a hollow, echoing emptiness settled deep within his chest. He had won the war entirely on his own terms. He had used Blythe's own PR machine to destroy her, turning her carefully orchestrated scandal into a genuine, inescapable tragedy. He picked up his phone, the screen glowing dimly in the dark kitchen. The news notifications were endless. One headline caught his eye: lounge singer Primrose drops out of public eye following Laura scandal. He remembered the raw, shattered look in her eyes in the back office of the Velvet Room. She had been collateral damage, a fragile soul crushed under the wheels of Blythe's ambition and his own relentless vengeance. The music had stopped for her, replaced by a devastating silence. Aurelio opened his banking app. The accounts were divided. The lawyers were sorting through the wreckage of the marriage contract. Blythe was gone, retreating to a rented apartment across the bay, her reputation entirely ruined in the industry she had once dominated. She had bought the scandal she craved, but the price was everything she owned. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows of the dining room, looking out at the thick, rolling fog obscuring the city lights below. The penthouse on Nob Hill was empty. The bed with the deep crimson sheets would be stripped bare. The life they had built together was nothing more than a ghost story now, a cautionary tale whispered in the kitchens of rival chefs. Aurelio had crafted the perfect, fatal antidote to his wife's poison. He had served it cold, meticulously plated, and watched her consume it on a national stage. He was the undisputed master of his craft, a man who could turn heartbreak and betrayal into a flawless, three-star tasting menu. He leaned his forehead against the cold glass, the chill seeping into his skin. He was entirely alone, standing at the pinnacle of his success, surrounded by the ashes of his own life. He had protected his brand, his restaurant, and his pride. Aurelio closed his eyes as the realization finally, heavily settled into his bones. The Michelin star was cold, heavy, and tasted exactly like ashes.